The Revolutionary War lasted 6 years, from 1776 to 1781. When it was over, the 13 colonies were states. And of the 13 state flags that were to fly, Delaware's was the first. By the time the Declaration of Independence was read to the public on July 4th, 1776, the American colonies were already at war with England. The war and its reason, American independence, were made official on that day in July. The Declaration was not actually signed until August and later of 1776. 3 Delaware names appear at the base of Thomas Jefferson's famous document: Caesar Rodney, Thomas McCain, and George Reed, who had originally voted against independence. But there was one well-known Delawarean whose name did not appear. John Dickinson, whose farmers' letters had helped stir up the colonies, did not sign the Declaration of Independence. He was against the war with England and stuck to his opinion, though it cost him his popularity. But even though he was against the war, he was first and always an American, and he fought bravely in George Washington's army. John Dickinson was not the only Delawarean who was against the war. Many remained loyal to England. And then there were the Delaware Quakers. The Quakers, as a religious group, were against violence of any sort. They were against carrying weapons, and so they were opposed to war. In a number of cases, however, the desire for independence was stronger than the principle and tradition of nonviolence, and some Quakers went off to war. While Delaware citizens trained for war, the Delaware General Assembly prepared a new constitution. The government of a state would be quite a different thing from the government of a colony. In August of 1776, the first Delaware state constitution was completed. For the first time, the 3 lower counties had a definite name: the Delaware State. In 1777, John McKinley was elected president of Delaware State. The assembly was to continue as the governing body. A new state constitution was in effect. It was a big step forward. But 1777 turned out to be a bad year for the new Delaware State. In September of that year, the British invaded. They came from the sea, over 160 ships feeling their way down the Delaware coast, avoiding the Delaware River, which was carefully guarded, sliding up into Chesapeake Bay. George Washington knew they were coming. He moved his army south into Delaware. He gave his orders.
You are to be constantly near the enemy and give them every possible annoyance.
The well-trained British armies were hardly prepared for the American way of fighting, at least in the early stages of the war. In a century spent largely in peace and war with the Indians, the colonists had picked up a good many of their tricks. The Continental Army had neither the weapons nor the experience to meet the British troops on a well-planned, formal field of battle. In Europe, 2 opposing armies faced each other and fought in an appointed place according to rules. In America, the fighting was sneaky. The colonials hid in the bushes, behind trees and fences. They opened fire as the enemy marched past, and before the confused British could regroup themselves, the Americans had disappeared. It was an effective way to carry on battle, though the British did not find it very sporting. It was the way in which the colonials handled the invading army in 1777 at Couch's Bridge, Delaware. This was the only actual battle fought on Delaware soil, the skirmish at Couch's Bridge near Newark, when the British first invaded the state. The Battle of Couch's Bridge did not stop the English army, but it did slow its progress. The Delaware Regiment was an important part of George Washington's army. In the years to come, even the English soldiers paid respect to the Delawareans.
They are stubborn fighters, the Delaware Regiment. Hard in battle, fierce.
They have no idea what it's like to surrender. They might possibly win this war.
They were commanded by Colonel John Hazlitt. They were armed with whatever types of muskets or rifles they could find. Many of them had no uniforms, some no coats. Even in the war, they kept their high spirits and managed to be entertained. It is said that they kept a pair of Kent County blue gamecocks, and from these fighting cocks...
Wait, don't let them kill each other. They're like us. They'll fight till they die and be proud of it. That's us.
That's right. They are like us. We're Blue Hens chicks, same as them.
The name of the regiment, Blue Hens Chickens. The state bird of Delaware is said to have been decided in those early days of the Revolutionary War. By the time the first phase of the war was over in 1777, the British had taken over northern Delaware. They occupied Wilmington and captured John McKinley, president of Delaware State. Things looked bad for Delaware and for the colonists in general. The war was not going well. Washington had lost the Battle of Brandywine. In October, Philadelphia fell to the British, and the British Navy took over the Delaware River, using it for a supply line. Things looked grim. Newcastle, Delaware's capital, was located dangerously close to the British headquarters. It was risky for the General Assembly to meet in its usual manner. It met in various places, always dodging the English. Finally, the General Assembly moved south. The new capital of Delaware was established at Dover, where it has remained ever since. And on the battlefields of other colonies, the Delaware Regiment continued to prove its courage and determination. Wherever they were, the Delawareans stood and fought. And many of the Blue Hens chicks did fight until they died, and were proud to do it. The war went on. It went on for 4 more years. The outcome did not seem hopeful for the colonies. Many men were killed. The Continental Army was weary, discouraged, in great need of food, supplies, and more training. Soldiers went shoeless and left blood where they walked. The war for the Americans reached its low point in the winter of 1777-1778, when the Army camped at Valley Forge, Pennsylvania. The weather was bitter. There was no food. The cabins had no heat.
Part of the Army has been a week without food. The men are deserting and they are dying.
But into the gloom of Valley Forge came the experienced Prussian officer, Baron von Steuben. He retrained the soldiers, gave them confidence. The Army had camped for the winter, defeated. They marched out in the spring, ready to win the war. In 1778, France sent General Lafayette and reinforcements to help the colonists. And the British withdrew from Philadelphia, finding that possessing the city had gained them little or nothing. When they left, Delaware's fears of further invasion were over. The Continental Army stubbornly fought on. The tide had turned. The Americans grew stronger. And on October 19th, 1781, the British General Cornwallis surrendered to George Washington at Yorktown. The war was over. Now the United States as a nation must begin. In a very real way, the United States began in the old State House in Dover, Delaware. In 1787, representatives from the colonies met in Philadelphia to draw up a frame of government for the new nation. From this meeting came an historic document. the Constitution of the United States of America.
We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice.
The Constitution was put into writing. It had resulted from years of struggle, hardship, and war. It was the product and the heart of a land which had fought for its freedom and the right to rule itself. It remained only for the 13 former colonies to vote on the Constitution, to ratify it, and to become states of the Union. Delaware, the small colony nestled centrally among the others, wasted no time in deciding upon the Constitution. The Delaware Ratifying Convention met to vote on December 7, 1787. They met in the State House on the Dover Green. They knew what they had to do. They were prepared for the moment which would give them a firm place in history. To a man, they voted aye. The Assembly unanimously ratified the Constitution. Delaware was a state, and not only that, Delaware was the first state to ratify the Constitution, technically the first state of the Union. It might be said that the first star on the American flag belongs to Delaware. The little piece of land that had been so mixed up for so long had now come of age. Delaware, which had been confused for ages about what it actually was, now knew. Not an English colony, not a leftover piece of Pennsylvania, not 3 stray counties. It was a state, the first state.